Question relates to the federal exclusion of immigrants in a lot of programs. I run federally funded programs at Georgetown College and am painfully aware of the impact of people who cannot access those services. I also know that the federal government just conducted an extensive series of consultations across the country. I wasn't part of those, but I cannot believe that this issue did not come up. And I'd be very interested to know from people, I'm certain there are people in the room who were there, how the feds responded to that.
The question was?
Service eligibility.
The service eligibility for the IRCC, there was a consultation, and was that raised, and what was the response?
I am closer to the mic, so I can start.
Okay.
About the exclusion of certain categories of migrant populations from federally funded services, let me just put a corrector for Debbie. Debbie, the international students are in the slides, but they are under the potential future permanent residents. So because of lack of time, I didn't name all of the temporary migrant populations. I simply highlighted the refugee claimants. Are we good?
Yeah.
About the exclusion, coming back to the exclusion, we are in the primary stage of this research on immigrant women, youth, and services, and we are talking to service providers, policymakers, researchers about services in Ontario in particular. The fact that it hasn't come up as an issue in the consultation process, it's news to me. But I can say
it came up all the time.
It came up all the time.
All the time. I'm sorry. So to me, I think there is a greater understanding, recognition of the need to make certain, at least part of the temporary migrant population eligible for federally funded services. I highlighted especially two populations in my short presentation. Refugee claimants, that would be one category I think any sensible policymaker would recognize as a legitimate population. And also for recent citizens who just became citizens, there is a greater recognition that especially women, in the case of women who are recent citizens, that they need to have access to language training simply because they didn't have time or resources to attend language classes when they were permanent residents. But I should just conclude with this with a general statement that even among policy circles, I don't want to give any specifics, but even in policy circles, there is a hopeful sign of recognition of the need for eligibility of this category of populations.
Oh, do you want to say something?
Can you?
I'll let you go first.
Eligibility of services through federally funded programs is a key issue for us. It comes up every time we're at the table at the federal government. About 3 or 4 years ago, we thought we had a good opening, especially around migrant workers, and then the Royal Bank story hit the media, and that went right off the table. There is a pilot project at a BC funded by what's ESDC? Employment and Skills Development or Social Development Canada. That's funded a small pilot around providing services to migrant workers. Whether or not that will be scaled out across the country, I don't know. We're certainly pushing on it. But for us, the group who are most vulnerable and who were really wanting to have access to services are refugee claimants. We felt that we had an opportunity with the new caregivers pilot that was recently announced, that 3 months for folks who've been here for at least a year, who came post 2014 and are able to put in an application for permanent resident status. It's a very easy, relatively speaking, process, and we thought, oh, okay, it's an election year. This government seems to be in a good mood. Let's push around eligibility for services. Well, yesterday we got the answer, absolutely not. Organizations are not allowed to, even if we know that if not all, at least 98% of those women who are putting in those applications will become permanent residents in the next 6 to 8 months. So it is the key issue in terms, it makes no sense that at a time when with some populations their acceptance rates is 70, 80%, that they're not able to access services until after they receive PR, even after being in the country for 4, 5, 6 years. It makes absolutely no sense.
Just one quick comment. This is kind of a challenge with many government programs where governments, especially in an age of fiscal austerity such as we are experiencing now, are making short-term decisions that have very significant long-term consequences. And minimal or kind of moderate investments in the short term would actually pay off much more significantly in the long term if they were made. But that's just not how government planning horizons and fiscal decisions are made. So I think we kind of almost need to take a step back, because it's not just on immigration and settlement programs, but you look at the program like employment insurance, where half the number of unemployed Canadians are eligible for EI now as compared to the early 1990s. Who does that benefit? If we have somebody who's out of work, not eligible for EI, what's going to happen to that person? They're going to probably start drawing down social assistance, selling off their assets, and they're kind of spiraling into a much worse situation than if we broaden the eligibility for the program and help people. So I think we need to rethink how we make these decisions and we need to reward governments and think of some way the system can reward governments for making investments in the short term that might seem like they're costing us something, but then 5 years down the road, they're actually paying off and they're smart decisions. And that's a tricky nut to crack.
Yeah.
I appreciate what all of you have said, but nobody has actually answered how the federal government has responded to this in these consultations. Is it all about financing?
No, in the consultations, they took information in, but they did not challenge, or they did not feel that they had.
Yeah, the federal government is used to us raising this issue. They know that it's an issue. They're hiding behind Treasury Board regulations, right? And our pushback around that is that the department decides what its criteria is, gives it to Treasury Board, and then Treasury Board holds them accountable to what it is that they've decided the scope of their program is. So it's a political decision that has to be made. We need the minister, and the minister uses finance as the issue. That if we were to open up eligibility, I think last week I heard him say we'll have to double the $700 and whatever million we spend on settlement outside of Quebec. Well, you know, Quebec gets almost $1 billion and takes in 40,000 people. Maybe we should use some of that money.
Yes.